Snow buried Montana the way grief buried a man for 3 long years. But that night there came a knock at the door. Jacob Thornton stood at his window watching the world disappear beneath white fury. December 24th, 1878. The thermometer outside read 15 below. Wind howled across the prairie like something alive and angry, erasing everything it touched. Behind him, his daughter set the table for two. The same ritual, the same silence, the same careful dance around the empty spaces in their home. Emma was 7 years old and already understood that some sorrows were too large for words. She moved through the cabin with a precision that belonged to someone much older, laying out plates and forks with the solemnity of a funeral attendant. Her father had taught her without meaning to that noise disturbed the dead and their house was full of ghosts. The cabin itself spoke of a life interrupted. 2 rooms of hand-hewn logs built by Jacob's own hands when he'd first claimed this land. A fieldstone fireplace that had seen laughter once. A rocking chair by the window that hadn't moved in 3 years, positioned exactly where Rebecca used to sit with her mending, catching the last of the afternoon light. Even the dust respected that chair. Emma cleaned around it weekly but never moved it. Some things were sacred. Outside the workshop bore a sign that read, Thornton and Son Carpentry. The word son had faded until it was barely visible, paint weathered by 3 winters of neglect. Jacob hadn't repainted it, couldn't bring himself to admit what everyone already knew. There would be no son. The boy had died with his mother, both of them lost to complications that no frontier doctor could fix. Jacob's hands moved automatically, cleaning his Winchester Model 1873. He'd done this every night for 3 years. Load the magazine, check the action, oil the metal, count the rounds. 20 bullets, same as always. The ritual gave his hands something to do besides shake. Gave his mind something to focus on besides the chair by the window and the woman who would never sit there again. He was 35 but looked older. Grief ages a man faster than hard work ever could. His hands bore the scars of his trade calluses, thick as leather, a 3-inch mark on his left palm from when he'd lost focus 6 months back, and the saw blade had bitten deep. Pain was easier than numbness. At least pain meant you were still alive. Emma's voice broke the silence, small and careful. Papa, is it time to eat? He turned from the window. His daughter stood there in a dress that had been let out twice, her brown hair pulled back in braids she'd learned to do herself because there was no mother to teach her. Rebecca's eyes looked out from Emma's face, blue as summer sky, and every time Jacob saw them, he felt the loss all over again. Yes, sweetheart, it's time. They sat at the table his father had built 40 years ago in Missouri, brought west in a wagon that no longer existed. 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 people in a house that used to hold warmth and laughter and the kind of love that made winter seem short. Emma bowed her head for grace. Jacob didn't. He'd stopped talking to God the day they'd buried Rebecca and the son who never drew breath. But he let his daughter pray because she needed to believe in something bigger than their shared sorrow. This knock came just as Emma finished her prayer. Sharp, urgent, desperate. Jacob froze, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody came to his door anymore. Not since he'd made it clear through 3 years of silence that he wanted to be left alone with his grief and his daughter and the ghost that wouldn't leave him be. The knock came again, harder now. A voice filtered through the wind, muffled, but distinctly female. Please, anyone. Emma's eyes went wide with the kind of fear that comes from knowing the world is dangerous and unpredictable. Papa, Jacob stood, Winchester in hand, and moved to the door. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore it. Let whoever it was find shelter somewhere else. He'd earned his isolation. He'd paid for it in blood and tears and 3 years of walking through life like a man already dead. But he opened the door anyway. The world rushed in with the storm, wind and snow and cold so sharp it stole breath from lungs. And there on his porch stood 3 people who would change everything. The woman was maybe 32, soaked through her wool cloak, clinging to her frame like a second skin. Her face showed exhaustion carved deep, the kind that came from weeks of struggle, not just one bad night. But her spine was straight, her chin was up. Even desperate and freezing, she held onto her pride like it was the last thing she owned. In her arms, a little girl no more than 3, wrapped in a shawl and shaking so hard her teeth chattered loud enough to hear over the wind. Beside her, a boy of maybe 5, his coat patched with burlap because proper fabric cost money his mother didn't have. His shoes had holes. His toes were visible, red and raw with frostbite. The woman's eyes met Jacob's, brown eyes deep and honest, and trying so hard not to beg. "Mr. Thornton, I apologize for the intrusion. We have nowhere else, so you go." Jacob recognized her from church, the widow who always sat in the back pew, the one who left before anyone could speak to her. Porter was her name, he thought. Grace Porter, maybe. No Abigail. Abigail Porter. His hand tightened on the door. Every part of him wanted to close it, protect the fragile peace he'd built from the ruins of his life, keep the world and its complications outside where they belonged. Emma appeared beside him, so small she barely reached his elbow. She looked up at him with Rebecca's eyes, then at the three people freezing on their porch. "Papa," she said quietly, "it's Christmas Eve." He didn't respond, couldn't move, paralyzed between the man he'd been and the ghost he'd become. The baby Jesus was born in a stable because there was no room at the inn. Emma's voice carried the simple certainty of childhood faith. "We have room." The words hit like a fist to the chest. Rebecca would have said the same thing, would have opened the door before the knock even finished, would have welcomed these strangers with warmth and food and the kind of generosity that made frontier life bearable. Jacob stepped aside. The woman hesitated, pride warring with necessity in her expression. Then she crossed the threshold, children stumbling in behind her. Snow fell from their coats onto his clean floor, melting into puddles that spread like accusations. Jacob closed the door. The wind's howl cut off, leaving sudden silence that felt almost loud. 5 people stood in a room meant for 2. The air changed, became fuller, heavier, almost alive. "There's soup," Jacob said, his voice rough from disuse. "Mom." "Not much, but it's hot." The woman nodded, not trusting her voice. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Outside, the storm intensified. Christmas Eve descended into darkness. And in Jacob Thornton's cabin, for the first time in 3 years, something besides grief took up residence. Jacob moved to the fireplace, adding logs with mechanical precision. 3 more than usual. The room would need extra heat. The strangers stood in a cluster near the door, uncertain whether to stay or flee. Emma Blesser had already pulled the little girl toward the hearth. She knelt beside her and offered her corn-husk doll without prompting. "This is Rosie," Emma said with all the solemnity of a sacred trust. "She keeps you safe at night." The child took the doll with reverent hands, clutching it against her chest. For the first time since entering, she smiled. Just a little. Just enough. Abigail Porter watched her daughter with an expression Jacob recognized. Gratitude mixed with shame. The look of a mother who hated needing help but would swallow any amount of pride to keep her children alive. She turned away quickly, pretending to remove her wet shawl, but Jacob saw her wipe her eyes, saw her shoulders shake just once before she locked herself down tight again. The boy Thomas stood very still, too still, like he'd learned that being invisible was safer than being noticed. His eyes tracked every movement, cataloging exits and threats with the wariness of someone who'd seen too much hardship in his short life. Jacob found blankets in the chest by the wall. Rebecca's quilts, hand-stitched during the year she carried Emma. The colors were still bright, roses and vines in red and green. He'd kept them folded away, unable to look at them without seeing her hands moving the needle, her belly swollen with their first child humming while she worked. He handed them to Abigail without a word. "Thank you," she whispered. Then louder, with more control, "We'll leave at first light. I promise we won't be any trouble." Jacob looked at the window where snow piled higher by the minute. "Storm's getting worse. We'll talk about tomorrow when it comes." He moved to the pantry and ladled venison stew into 5 bowls. The pot had held enough for 2 people for several days. Now it would barely make 1 meal for 5. He did the math automatically, years of frontier survival making calculations second nature. His supplies would last 2 people 3 more weeks, with 5 mouths to feed, maybe 10 days. After that, he'd need to buy more, and his cash was already running thin. Winter was always slow for carpentry work, but he divided the portions evenly and set them on the table. The children ate like they were starving. Thomas tried to be careful, tried to show manners, but hunger won out. He scraped his bowl clean and licked his spoon when he thought no one was watching. Rose simply shoveled food into her mouth with both hands, too young to care about propriety. Abigail took small bites, chewing slowly, clearly, saving half her portion for later. For her children, if they were still hungry. Jacob watched and said nothing, but he cut the last of his bread and put the whole half loaf on his table. Eat. She met his eyes and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. She knew he saw what she was doing, and he was telling her to stop, to eat, to trust that there would be enough. Her hand trembled slightly as she took a piece of bread. When the meal was done, the question of sleeping arrangements arose. Jacob offered his bed to Abigail and the children. She refused. They settled on a compromise. The children would sleep in Emma's room, all three together. Abigail would take the settee in the main room. Jacob would make a bedroll by the fire. As he arranged his blankets on the hard floor, his hand brushed against one of Rebecca's quilts. The touch sent memory flooding back. Her fingers stitching these patterns. Her voice humming some old hymn he'd forgotten the words to. Her smile when she'd finished, holding it up to show him her belly round with Emma, her face glowing with happiness that seemed to fill the whole cabin. Guilt hit him like a physical blow. Was he betraying her by letting another woman into this house, into the space Rebecca had filled, into the life they'd built together? From Emma's room came the sound of children's laughter. His daughter teaching the other two some clapping game, their voices bright with the kind of joy he'd forgotten children could make. 3 years of careful silence, shattered by the simple happiness of childhood play. The house felt different, warmer, fuller, almost alive. Jacob lay in the darkness listening to 5 people breathe instead of 2. Abigail shifted on the settee, clearly still awake, her mind probably racing with the same thoughts that kept him staring at the ceiling. Neither of them spoke, but both knew. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight there was only this. A door opened on Christmas Eve. Strangers becoming something more than strangers. The first crack in 3 years of ice. Morning came with sounds Jacob had forgotten existed. Someone moving in his kitchen. A woman's soft humming. The sizzle of eggs in his cast iron pan. The smell of coffee, rich and dark and real. For one confused moment, still half in dreams, he thought Rebecca had come back. That the last 3 years had been the nightmare and this was waking up. Then consciousness returned with its usual cruelty. Rebecca was dead. Their son was dead. 3 years gone and never coming back. But the house was alive. Jacob dressed quickly and emerged from his bedroll to find Abigail at his stove. She'd already found the eggs, the bacon, the coffee beans he kept for Sunday mornings. She moved through his kitchen with quiet efficiency, a woman who knew how to make a meal from whatever was available. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning. "I'm not accustomed to idleness." "It's fine." His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "More than fine." She poured coffee and set a cup before him. Their hands didn't touch, but he felt the nearness of another adult like heat from a stove. After 3 years of speaking only to a 7-year-old adult presence, felt both strange and necessary. Through the frosted window, he could see Emma showing Thomas how to scatter feed for the chickens. The boy watched with intense concentration, as if this simple task mattered more than anything in his young life. When he scattered the grain exactly as Emma demonstrated, she praised him, and his whole face lit up. Little Rose sat by the fire building towers from wooden blocks Jacob had carved for Emma years ago. She hummed the same tune her mother had been humming. The sound wrapped around the cabin like a warm blanket. Abigail sat across from him at the table, wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like she needed its warmth more than its caffeine. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." She met his eyes directly. No shame, no looking away, just honesty. "My husband died 6 months ago. Cholera. We lived in Wyoming territory. He had a homestead claim there, a small cabin." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "After he passed, his brother wrote saying there was family land here in Montana. Said we could settle it, make something." Her voice stayed level, factual. Jacob recognized the tone, the way you spoke of unbearable things when you'd run out of tears. "I came west with what little we had, but when I arrived, the claim was abandoned. No house, no family, just prairie and promises that turned out to be lies." She looked at him steadily. "The brother moved on 2 years ago. Nobody knew where." Jacob thought about his own years of mistakes. The way he'd let grief turn him into a ghost. The way Emma had learned to be too quiet, too careful, afraid of disturbing the sorrow that filled every room. "We've all made poor choices. The children burst through the door, cold air rushing in with them. Their cheeks burned red. Their eyes were bright with the simple pleasure of morning tasks completed. "Papa," Emma's voice carried more life than Jacob had heard in months. "Thomas helped me carry water without spilling any." The boy beamed with pride, standing a little straighter. "Can they stay for Christmas dinner?" Emma asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Abigail tensed, ready for refusal, ready to gather her children and leave despite the snow and nowhere to go. Jacob watched his daughter come alive again in their presence, watched these strangers who somehow didn't feel strange at all. "Christmas dinner," he agreed. "Then we see what the weather does." Abigail's shoulders dropped. Relief, gratitude, something deeper he couldn't name yet. That afternoon, while the children played and Abigail mended their worn clothes by the fire, Jacob stood at his workbench, pretending to sharpen tools he'd sharpened yesterday. But he was watching them, watching his house fill with sound and presence, watching Emma teach Rose a clapping game, watching Thomas carefully stack firewood exactly the way Jacob had shown him that morning. Something had shifted overnight, not just in his cabin, but deeper in the hollow place where his heart used to be. The thought terrified him almost as much as it gave him hope. Later, needing space to process everything, he climbed to the attic for extra blankets. The pull-down ladder creaked under his weight. Cold air hit him as he emerged into the dusty space where he kept things too painful to see every day. Rebecca's trunk sat in the corner. Cedarwood hand-carved a wedding gift he'd made when they were both so young they thought love could conquer anything. He hadn't opened it since the week after her funeral. His hand rested on the lid. 3 years of avoiding this moment. 3 years of pretending he could live in a house full of her things and never have to actually look at them. He opened it. Her wedding dress lay folded on top, yellowed slightly, with time but still beautiful. The scent of lavender rose from the sachet she'd kept with it. Memory hit him like a fist. Rebecca at 22 walking down the aisle of the small church. Her smile when he lifted her veil. The way she'd looked at him like he was everything she'd ever wanted. Beneath the dress, baby clothes. Tiny gowns she'd sewn by hand, preparing for the son she was certain she carried. They'd chosen names. Samuel after Jacob's father. The boy would grow up learning carpentry, carrying on 3 generations of craftsmanship. None of it had happened. The clothes had never been worn, never would be. Jacob's hands shook as he touched them. At the bottom of the trunk, he found her diary, small, leather-bound, the first page marked in her careful handwriting. My thoughts 1873 to 1875. He'd known she kept it, had never read it. A diary was private, sacred. But she was gone now, and maybe she'd left something in these pages that could help him understand how to live without her. He opened to the last entry, December 15th, 1875, 1 week before she died. The handwriting was shakier than usual. She'd been weak already, he realized, sick in knowing it. My dearest Jacob, if you are reading this after I am gone, please listen to me. The words blurred as his eyes filled. He blinked hard and kept reading. I know you. I know how deeply you love. I know my death will break you. And I know you will want to freeze everything as it was to preserve our life together, like keeping a museum of what we had. Do not let grief close our door. Do not let our home become a tomb. Do not let Emma grow up in a house of silence and sorrow. Here is what I ask of you. Live. Not just survive, but truly live. If someone needs shelter, give it. If someone needs family, be it. If someone needs love, offer it. That is how love survives death. By multiplying, not by guarding what is left. Open the door, Jacob. When someone knocks, open it. For Emma's sake, who needs a mother's touch? For your sake, who needs a partner in life? For my sake, because this is how you honor me. Not by keeping a shrine, but by continuing to build, to love, to live. If you find someone else to love, I will not be jealous. I will be grateful. Because it means you are still alive, not just existing. Love again, Jacob. That is how you honor me most. Forever yours, Rebecca. The sob that tore from his chest came from somewhere deep, a place that had been frozen for 3 years. Jacob sat on the cold attic floor and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not quiet tears, but gut-wrenching grief finally released. But mixed with the grief was something else. Permission, understanding, release. Rebecca had known exactly what he would become. A ghost walking through life frozen in the moment of loss, unable to move forward or back. And she'd left him instructions, not suggestions, commands. Open the door. He had, Christmas Eve, against every instinct, against everything he'd built to protect himself from more pain. He'd opened the door. This wasn't betrayal, this was obedience. Abigail hadn't replaced Rebecca. She'd reminded him that Rebecca wanted him to live. Jacob climbed down from the attic, diary in hand, his face tear-stained but somehow lighter. A weight he'd carried for 3 years had lifted. That evening, after the children were asleep, Abigail stood in the spare room doorway, her belongings bundled beside her. "I'll leave tomorrow. The snow has stopped. We can reach town." "No," she turned surprised. "You've done more than enough. Stay." "Jacob, I can't keep imposing on your kindness. Stay through winter. At least, it's the Christian thing to do, whatever Ruth Caldwell thinks about it." "Ruth Caldwell? You'll meet her Sunday. And the others." Abigail studied his face, seeing something new there, some shift she couldn't quite name. "The whole town will talk." "Let them." She sat on the edge of the bed, her bundle still packed, but her resolve weakening. "I'm frightened." "Of what?" "That I'm taking advantage of your kindness. That I can't repay this. That I'll destroy everything you have here." Jacob moved closer, wanting to touch her shoulder but maintaining the careful distance they'd both observed. "You gave me something I thought died with Rebecca." "What?" "A reason to build instead of just survive." The silence between them held weight. Both knew they'd crossed some invisible line, admitted something neither was ready to fully examine. From the other room came Rose's sleepy voice calling for her mother. Abigail stood grateful for the interruption, but she didn't unpack, and she didn't argue any more about leaving. Later that night, they sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, not speaking much, not touching, just existing in the same space, each wrestling with feelings they couldn't yet articulate. The lamp burned low between them. Outside, the first robin appeared weeks early, as if even the birds knew change was coming. The church went silent when Jacob walked in with all 4 of them. Christmas morning service. The small frontier chapel packed with familiar faces. Neighbors, customers, people Jacob had known for a decade. Abigail walked beside him, children between them. Emma held Thomas's hand like a protective older sister. Every head turned. You could hear the collective intake of breath, feel the judgment forming in the cold air. Jacob guided them to his usual pew, front row where everyone could see, where there was no pretending, no hiding. If this was going to be a scandal, better to face it directly. Pastor Reynolds stumbled over his greeting. The organist hit 2 wrong notes. Women leaned toward each other, whispering behind gloved hands. Men's faces hardened into familiar, frontier disapproval. The sermon felt longer than usual, pointed. When the pastor spoke about propriety, about maintaining Christian standards, about how actions spoke louder than words, every word aimed at the front pew, like arrows finding their target. Jacob felt every eye on the back of his neck. Emma shrank closer to him, sensing something wrong, even if she didn't understand what. After the service on the church steps, Ruth Caldwell intercepted them. Her face showed concern that was somehow worse than open hostility. "Jacob, might I have a word?" Abigail took the children toward the wagon. She knew what was coming. "People are talking," Ruth said without preamble. "People always talk. A widow and widower under one roof, it doesn't look proper. It's Christian charity on Christmas. I'm sure your intentions are good, Jacob, but you know how people talk in a small town. Think of Emma. Think of your reputation." Jacob felt anger rising hot and unexpected after 3 years of feeling almost nothing. "Are you saying I should have left them in the snow?" "Of course not. But there's a boarding house in Silverton. Perhaps help her find work there. A proper arrangement." "I appreciate your concern, Ruth, but I'll handle my own household." He walked away before she could respond. On the ride home, Abigail sat rigid beside him. The children huddled in the wagon bed under blankets too young to understand but old enough to sense tension. "I heard what she said, every word." Jacob said nothing. "I'll leave after the storm passes completely. Tomorrow, maybe." "And go where?" "Somewhere. Anywhere. I've managed this far." The wagon wheels crunched through snow. The horse's breath steamed in cold air. Jacob thought about his empty cabin, about years of silence stretching ahead like frozen prairie. Stay. Abigail turned sharply. What? Stay through winter, at least. Jacob, the whole town will make your life impossible. They already do. Been a ghost for 3 years. Folks don't know what to do with grief they can't fix. This is different. This is scandal. Let them talk. He kept his eyes on the road. You need somewhere safe. The children need warmth and food. Emma needs what you have given her these past 2 days. What have I given her? Life, Jacob said simply. The cabin's been a tomb since Rebecca died. You brought it back. That evening after the children slept, Jacob stood on his porch smoking his pipe. The sky had cleared, stars sharp as broken glass against black velvet. Abigail found him there. They'll make your life difficult. The town, they already do. This is different. Jacob knocked ash from his pipe. Out here, a closed door on Christmas Eve is a sin the devil himself wouldn't commit. I opened mine. They can judge me for that if they want. Neither of them moved. They stood together in the cold, not touching, watching stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight there was just this. 2 broken people trying to protect what was left of hope. Days blurred together. A rhythm developed. Jacob teaching Thomas to stack wood properly, bark side up to shed water. Emma showing Rose how to feed chickens without scaring them. Abigail transforming the cabin with small touches. Clean curtains made from flour sacks. An organized pantry. Mended clothes that had gone unrepaired for months. Evenings fell into pattern. Abigail mending by firelight. Jacob whittling, teaching Thomas the basics. Children's laughter from the next room. Comfortable silence between the adults, companionable rather than awkward. But town trips grew tense. At the general store, Warren Mitchell served Jacob last, making him wait while helping others first. When Jacob needed credit for supplies, Warren's face hardened. Store policy changed, cash only now. I've had credit here 10 years. New policy. The price of flour had mysteriously increased. Only for Jacob, the blacksmith suddenly had pressing work elsewhere whenever Jacob appeared. Carpentry customers canceled orders with thin excuses. The isolation was strategic, coordinated, brutal in its efficiency. One afternoon, Emma came home crying. Jacob heard her before he saw her. Harsh sobs that tore at his chest. She ran into his arms, face buried in his shirt, whole body shaking. What happened? Between sobs, the story emerged. Girls at school, accusations about Jacob and Abigail living in sin, declarations that Emma couldn't play with them anymore, questions about whether they were bad people. Abigail appeared in the doorway, face stricken. I'm so sorry. Jacob held his daughter while rage and helplessness warred in his chest. He'd known consequences would come, but watching them land on his child cut deeper than any financial hardship. That night he found Abigail in the spare room, her belongings neatly bundled, Thomas and Rose's few possessions packed beside them. I can't watch your child suffer for my presence. Don't. Jacob, I have to. She came home crying because of me. Then don't leave. What other choice is there? Jacob stared at the packed bundles. At the end of something that had barely begun, the thought of the cabin empty again was unbearable. Stay. Not as charity anymore. Not as temporary arrangement. Stay because this house died when Rebecca did and you brought it back. All of you. Stay because I'm asking you to let us be your family, because you already are. Abigail's composure cracked. Tears fell freely. The whole town will never accept this. Then we'll have each other. That's more than I've had in 3 years. Her gaze moved from the packed belongings to the door where children slept, beyond finally settling on Jacob offering something neither of them fully understood yet. She didn't unpack immediately, but she didn't leave either. 1 more week, then we'll see. Jacob nodded, knowing it was really yes. The town meeting wasn't supposed to be about Jacob Thornton. The agenda said spring planning, road repairs, cattle disease prevention. But everyone knew the real reason they'd gathered. Jacob sat in the back row while neighbors discussed mundane matters. Then Warren Mitchell stood. Before we adjourn, there's a matter of community standards we need to address. The room's temperature dropped. All eyes shifted to Jacob. Jacob Thornton has been housing a woman and her children for 3 weeks now. No formal arrangement announced. No engagement declared. It's improper. Sets a poor example especially for our young people. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Ruth Caldwell rose her voice surprisingly emotional. We're not heartless. The situation was complicated, but it's gone on too long. There's a boarding house in Silverton. We'd take up a collection, help Mrs. Porter resettle properly. It's the decent solution for everyone involved. More nods, the consensus building like a storm. Suggestions flew. She could work as a seamstress or a cook, respectable positions for a widow. They were discussing Abigail like she was a problem to be solved, a complication to be tidily removed so the town could return to comfortable righteousness. Jacob felt anger rising hot and clean after years of feeling nothing but grief's dull ache. He stood. The room fell silent. No. The word dropped like a stone into still water. No, I won't send her away. I won't send those children into uncertainty because you're uncomfortable with kindness that doesn't fit your narrow rules. Warren's voice sharpened. This isn't about kindness. It's about decency. You're throwing away your reputation for what exactly? For a woman who had nowhere else to go. For two children who'd done nothing wrong except be born to hardship. For my daughter who's been more alive these 3 weeks than the 3 years since her mother died. Ruth Caldwell stood. Think of Emma's future, her reputation. Her reputation, Jacob's voice rose. She's 7 years old and she's learning that mercy matters more than gossip. That's what her mother would have taught her. Clyde Barrett, another town elder, stood as well. You're choosing to disgrace yourself, your family name, everything your father built in this territory. I'm choosing to act like Christ instead of just talking about it on Sundays. Then Warren Mitchell did something unexpected. He stood, his voice shaking, tears beginning to stream down his weathered face. You want to know why this bothers me, Jacob? Why I can't just let this go? The room went absolutely still. Because I loved her. Rebecca, I loved her first. Gasps erupted around the room. This was a secret no one had known. A wound 2 decades old suddenly torn open. 20 years ago, before you came to Silver Creek, I courted her, asked her father's permission, bought a ring, was going to propose at the spring dance. Warren looked directly at Jacob, tears flowing freely now. Then you rode into town, new territory, new opportunities, and she chose you. His voice broke. I accepted that. Married Eleanor, built a life. But when Rebecca died, when I saw you broken, part of me thought, now you know. Now you know what it's like to lose her. And I waited for you to grieve properly, to honor her memory the way she deserved. His voice rose, anger and grief tangled together. But 3 weeks, and you replace her with a stranger, with someone who didn't know her, didn't love her, didn't earn the right to stand where she stood. Warren collapsed into his chair, weeping. It's not about scandal, Jacob. It's about betrayal. You're betraying Rebecca's memory, and I can't watch you erase her like she never mattered. The room sat in stunned silence. This wasn't simple moralism anymore. This was grief wearing the mask of righteousness, pain dressed up as propriety. Jacob pulled the diary from his coat pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it to the last page. Warren, I'm sorry, I didn't know about your feelings for Rebecca. But she's not being erased. She's not being replaced. He began to read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion choking him. Don't let grief close our door. Don't let our home become a tomb. If someone needs shelter, give it. If someone needs family, be it. That's how love survives death. By multiplying, not by guarding what's left. Open the door, Jacob. His voice broke on the last words. I'm not betraying her, Warren. I'm finally obeying her. I'm finally doing what she asked me to do 3 years ago. Abigail Porter didn't replace Rebecca. She reminded me that Rebecca wanted me to live, not just survive. He looked around the room at faces showing confusion, anger, some beginning to soften. And if you can't understand that kindness matters more than appearance, that compassion outweighs your comfort, then that's your moral failure, not mine. Jacob walked out into the cold January night, hands shaking so hard he could barely grip the door handle. Behind him, argument exploded into chaos. Someone had ridden ahead. Abigail met him at the cabin door, face pale, eyes wide with fear. What have you done? What I had to. They'll destroy you, your business, your daughter's future, your place here. I know. Then why? Jacob looked at her in the lamplight spilling from the doorway, at this woman who had brought his house back to life, who had made his daughter laugh again, who had shown him the difference between existing and living. Because losing you costs more. The words hung between them, truth spoken plainly, no more hiding. Abigail's eyes glistened. She said nothing. Neither of them slept that night. By morning, the consequences would begin, but tonight they had each other. And outside, the last of winter's harshness began to break. Spring was coming, whether the town was ready or not. The punishment came swift and thorough. By week's end, Jacob's carpentry customers had vanished like smoke and wind. Orders canceled with excuses so thin, they insulted his intelligence. Mrs. Henderson decided to wait until summer for her dining table. Mr. Walsh found someone cheaper in Silverton for his porch repair. The Olson family changed their plans entirely about bedroom furniture they'd commissioned 3 months prior. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. In 7 days, Jacob lost $85 in contracted work. That represented 2 months of income in a good season. Winter was never a good season. At the general store, Warren Mitchell's face had turned to stone. He served every other customer first, making Jacob wait 20 minutes while he measured out flour for Mrs. Henderson with agonizing slowness. When Jacob's turn finally came, Warren's words were clipped and cold. What do you need? 20 pounds flour, 5 of coffee, 2 quarts lamp oil. Cash only. Store policy changed. Jacob kept his voice level. I've had credit here 10 years, Warren. New policy, corporate directive. It was a lie. Warren owned the store outright. There was no corporation, but Jacob paid in cash and said nothing about the flour costing 40 cents more per 20 pounds than it had the previous week. The other customers watched him leave. Their eyes followed him out the door. Before it closed behind him, the whispers started. At Peter Jorgensen's blacksmith shop, Jacob brought a broken saw blade that needed sharpening. Normally a 10-minute job. Peter looked at the blade, then at Jacob, then away. Awful busy right now, Jacob. Maybe try Silverton. It's 10 minutes of work, Peter. Still, backed up. Sorry. Peter turned away, hammering at a horseshoe that clearly didn't need more hammering. The dismissal was absolute. Martin Cross, who'd been Jacob's closest friend for 8 years, crossed the street to avoid him. Tipped his hat in acknowledgement but didn't stop. Didn't speak. Just kept walking with shoulders hunched in what might have been shame but didn't change the action. Jacob understood. Martin owned half the blacksmith shop with Peter. If Peter had threatened to dissolve their partnership over Jacob, Martin had chosen business over friendship. Frontier survival often required such choices. Understanding didn't make it hurt less. The women were more direct in their cruelty. When Abigail walked through town, they formed tight circles that physically excluded her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when she approached. They stepped aside as she passed, not with violence, but with deliberate distance that said more than words ever could. Their message was clear. You are not one of us. You will never be one of us. Abigail held her chin high through it all. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing the hurt, but Jacob saw it in the tightness of her shoulders. In the way her eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed until she was home. At church the following Sunday, the isolation intensified. Families that had sat near Jacob for years suddenly found seats elsewhere. The pew in front of him remained conspicuously empty. Behind him the same. They'd created an island of judgment around his family. Emma noticed. Children always notice. She pressed closer to Jacob's side, her small hand gripping his coat. During the service, Pastor Reynolds preached about the appearance of evil, about how Christians must maintain standards even when it was difficult, about how charity, while virtuous, must be conducted with propriety. Every word landed like a stone. After service, no one spoke to them. People filed past as if Jacob and his household were invisible. Even the children avoided Emma, called away by mothers with sharp voices and warning looks. On the way home, Emma was quiet. Too quiet. That evening, she went to bed without being asked. Jacob found her later staring at the ceiling, tears tracking silently down her face. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Am I bad papa? The question hit him like a fist. No, you're the best thing in my life. Then why don't the other girls want to play with me anymore? Jacob had no answer that would make sense to a 7-year-old. How do you explain that adults often hurt children to punish other adults? That righteousness could be wielded like a weapon? That people who claim to follow Christ could be so fundamentally unchristian? He held her until she fell asleep. Then he stood in the hallway, fists clenched, rage and helplessness warring in his chest. They could hurt him. He could take that. But watching them hurt his daughter crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The financial pressure mounted daily. Jacob's cash reserves dwindled. $47 when this started, now $32. At this rate, he'd be broke by March. The supplies in his pantry wouldn't last much longer either. Feeding 5 people burned through resources faster than he'd calculated. He began rationing without telling anyone. Smaller portions for himself, claiming he wasn't hungry when he was, making sure the children ate their fill while his own stomach growled. Abigail noticed. Of course she noticed. One evening after the children were asleep, she confronted him. "You're not eating enough." "I'm fine." "Don't lie to me, Jacob. I see how much you put on your plate. It's half what you ate 2 weeks ago." He said nothing. What could he say? That he was trying to make their dwindling supplies last. That every meal now required calculations about how many days until they'd run out. Abigail sat across from him at the table. In the lamplight, her face showed exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes. A tightness around her mouth that came from constant worry. This has to stop. What has to stop? This, all of it. I'm destroying your life, Jacob. Your business is gone. Your friends won't speak to you. Your daughter is being punished for my presence. It's not your fault. It is. My being here caused all of this. She stood, decision made. I'm taking the children to Silverton tomorrow. I'll find work. We'll manage somehow. Abigail, no. Yes, I should have left weeks ago. I was selfish. I let you convince me to stay because it was easier than facing the world alone again. But I can't watch you sacrifice everything anymore. Jacob stood too, the table between them. You think leaving will fix this? It will give you your life back. What life? His voice rose despite himself. 3 years of existing isn't a life, it's a slow death. You showed me the difference. I'm not going back to that tomb. Then what are we doing here, Jacob? What is this? The question hung between them, demanding an answer neither of them was ready to give. But before Jacob could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Fast, urgent, someone riding hard despite the late hour. Jacob grabbed his Winchester and moved to the window. A single rider horse lathered despite the cold. The man dismounted and strode toward the cabin with the confidence of someone who believed he had every right to be there. Jacob opened the door before the man could knock. The stranger was maybe 38, well-dressed, in a wool suit too fine for Frontier, Montana. His face showed dissipation around the edges, eyes that moved too quickly, cataloging everything, looking for angles and advantages. You must be Thornton. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm Clayton Porter, Abigail's brother-in-law, come to fetch my family home. Everything in the man's bearing set Jacob's instincts screaming. This wasn't a concerned relative. This was a predator. Abigail appeared behind Jacob, her face going pale. Clayton? Abigail? His smile widened, showing too many teeth. Looking well. Frontier life agrees with you. Or perhaps it's the accommodations. The implication in his tone was deliberate, calculated to wound. Thomas and Rose appeared in the doorway to Emma's room, drawn by the unfamiliar voice. When Thomas saw Clayton, he shrank back, fear flickering across his young face. Rose began to whimper. Clayton's smile never wavered. Children, come give your uncle a proper greeting. Neither child moved. We need to discuss family business. Clayton's eyes fixed on Jacob. Privately would be best. Anything you say to Abigail, you can say in front of me. Clayton's eyebrows rose. My. Moving fast, aren't we? Daniel's barely cold in the ground, and here you are playing house with his widow. Jacob's fist clenched. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll throw me off your property. I'm family Thornton. Blood, which is more than you can claim. He pulled papers from his coat. This is why I'm here. The land deed. Daniel's Wyoming homestead. 160 acres under the Homestead Act of 1862. Worth approximately $800 if sold. He looked at Abigail. You claim Daniel signed it over to you before he died, but I have no record of such a transaction, and I have witnesses who will testify Daniel promised that land to me. Abigail's voice was steady despite the tremor Jacob saw in her hands. Daniel signed it to me, for the children. He was very clear about that. So you claim, but you have no proof, no witnesses, just your word against mine. Clayton's smile turned cold. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign that deed over to me. In exchange, I'll forget about this little situation you've gotten yourself into here. He gestured at the cabin at Jacob, his meaning clear. Or I file a complaint with the territorial marshal. Claim you stole family property. That you abandoned your responsibilities as Daniel's widow. That you're cohabiting improperly in a manner that makes you an unfit guardian. He let the threat hang in the air. I can request custody of the children. Courts tend to favor blood relatives over a woman of questionable morals living with a man she's not married to. Thomas began to cry quietly. Rose clutched her mother's skirt. Jacob stepped forward, positioning himself between Clayton and Abigail. You've said your piece. Now get off my land. Clayton held his ground. 3 days, Abigail. Sign the deed over or I involve the law. He tipped his hat in mock politeness and walked back to his horse. Before mounting, he turned back. Enjoy your stolen family, Thornton. It won't last. He rode off into the darkness, leaving silence in his wake. Abigail was shaking, not with fear Jacob realized, but with rage. He killed Daniel. Jacob turned to her. What? Clayton killed my husband. I'm sure of it now. Daniel didn't die of cholera. The symptoms were wrong, and they started after Clayton began visiting. She sank into a chair, the weight of realization crushing her. He brought medicine. A tonic, he said, would help Daniel's digestion. Daniel would drink it and get sicker. I told Clayton it wasn't working. He said to keep giving it, that these things took time. Her voice broke. I gave my husband poison. Every day for 3 months, and I didn't know. Jacob knelt beside her. You didn't kill him. Clayton did. I gave him the poison. Because you were lied to. That's not the same thing. Thomas appeared at Abigail's side, his small voice cutting through the darkness. Mama, is Uncle Clayton going to take us away? Abigail pulled her son close. No, sweetheart, no one's taking you anywhere. But her eyes met Jacob's over the boy's head. They both knew she couldn't promise that. Not when the law favored blood relatives. Not when her reputation had been shredded by 3 weeks of living unmarried in Jacob's home. Jacob stood, decision crystallizing. Marry me. The words fell into stunned silence. Abigail stared at him. What? Marry me, worship me. If we're married, Clayton can't claim impropriety, can't say the children are in an unstable home. Jacob, you can't marry me just to protect us from Clayton. That's not the only reason. He took her hands, pulling her to her feet. I should have asked weeks ago. I've been a coward about it. But this family, you, me, Emma, Thomas, Rose, it's real. It matters. You're asking me to marry you because we're being threatened. I'm asking because I want to. Clayton just gave me the push I needed to say it out loud. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She saw her children, saw Emma standing in the doorway with hope. Written across her young face, saw the home they'd begun building together in this cabin. Yes, the word was barely a whisper, but it changed everything. They decided on Sunday for the wedding, 4 days away. Time enough to speak with Pastor Reynolds and make it legal. Not enough time for Clayton to act first. Jacob rode into town the next morning. The streets were hostile territory now. Eyes tracked him from windows. Conversations stopped when he passed, but he walked into the church office with his head high. Pastor Reynolds looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. Jacob, I didn't expect to see you. I need you to perform a wedding, Sunday, after the regular service. The pastor's expression shifted. You and Mrs. Porter. Yes. Jacob, this is very sudden. It looks like you're trying to avoid scandal rather than proper courtship. We're making official what's already true. We're a family, have been since Christmas Eve. The congregation won't like this. The congregation doesn't have to like it. They just have to accept it's happening. Reynolds studied him for a long moment, Then he sighed. Your late wife, Rebecca, she was a remarkable woman. She was. I knew her before you did, before you came to Silver Creek. She used to help organize the church socials. Always had a kind word for everyone. Jacob didn't know where this was going but stayed silent. I remember once a woman came through town. Rough circumstances. Some scandal following her. Most folks wanted her moved along. Rebecca stood up in a church meeting and said that Christ didn't turn away sinners, that if we called ourselves Christians, neither should we. Reynolds smiled sadly. She won that argument. The woman stayed. Found work. Built a good life here. He looked at Jacob directly. Rebecca would approve of what you're doing. I'm certain of that. Then you'll perform the ceremony. I will. Reynolds stood extending his hand. This Sunday, after service, I'll make the announcement. Jacob shook his hand, surprised by the support. One thing, Jacob, my wife Ruth, she won't like this. I know. But she's not in charge of this church. I am. And it's past time I remembered that. Saturday night, Jacob worked late in his workshop behind the cabin. The February cold had broken slightly. Not warm, but no longer the killing freeze of deep winter. He'd been carving a cradle. Started it weeks ago, working on it in stolen moments when he couldn't sleep. Now he bent over it with renewed purpose, adding the final details. Roses and vines, the same pattern Rebecca had sewn into her quilts. Oak leaves for strength. Intertwined initials in a place where only he would see them. RT&AT, past and the future woven together. He didn't hear Abigail approach until she spoke. It's beautiful. He straightened, wiping sawdust from his hands. Thought we might need it, someday. She stepped closer, running her fingers over the carved roses. You're thinking about children. More children. Maybe, if you wanted. No pressure. I'd like that. Her voice was quiet. Daniel and I, we never had that kind of marriage. It was practical, respectful, but not what I see when you talk about Rebecca. What do you see? Passion, real love, the kind that lasts beyond death. Jacob set down his tools. What Rebecca and I had was good, real, but it's past. What I'm feeling now, it's different, but it's not less. Abigail looked at him in the lamplight. What are you feeling? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Like I'm waking up after 3 years of sleep. Like the world has color again. Like I want to build a future instead of just surviving the present. He stepped closer. Like I'm falling in love with you. If that's not too soon to say, if that doesn't scare you off. Abigail's breath caught. It doesn't scare me. Good. They stood close enough to touch, but didn't, not yet. Tomorrow would make it official. Tonight, this tension between them was enough. I should go in, Abigail said. The children will wonder. Yes, neither of them moved. Then from the cabin came the sound of breaking glass. A shout. Jacob grabbed his rifle and ran. The workshop was fully engulfed by the time he reached the yard. Flames shot 20 feet high, fed by the dry lumber stored inside. The heat was intense enough to feel from 50 yards away. Abigail stood in the cabin doorway, Emma beside her. Thomas and Rose. They were playing in there earlier. They might have gone back, Jacob didn't think. He ran toward the fire. The heat hit him like a wall, spoke thick enough to choke on. Visibility down to 2 feet. The crackle of burning wood loud as thunder in his ears. Thomas rose. A small cough answered him. There in the back corner. Thomas huddled over something, trying to protect it from the flames. As Jacob got closer, he saw what the boy held. A wooden horse half-carved. Thomas's wedding present for him. The child was unconscious from smoke inhalation. Jacob grabbed him, tucking the boy under one arm. Then he saw Rose, huddled in the opposite corner, terrified, awake, but frozen with fear. Thomas went to get his horse. I followed. Then fire. A beam cracked overhead. The roof was going to collapse. Seconds, maybe less. Jacob couldn't make 2 trips. The decision was instant. He grabbed Rose with his free arm, one child under each, and ran for the door. Behind him, the roof collapsed with a sound like the world ending. He stumbled into the yard and fell to his knees. Both children alive, coughing, breathing, alive. Abigail was there sobbing, pulling her children into her arms. Emma stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. But the children were alive. People arrived from town, drawn by the glow of flames visible for miles. Warren Mitchell, Ruth Caldwell, Martin Cross, others. They stood in a semicircle watching the warehouse burn, and watching Jacob, soot-covered and coughing, his clothes still smoking, clutching two children who weren't his blood but might as well have been. Warren stepped forward first. He didn't say anything, just offered his hand. Jacob took it. "We'll rebuild it," Martin said quietly. "The town will help." Ruth Caldwell approached Abigail. "The children, are they hurt?" "Smoke inhalation, but breathing. Bring them to my house. I have herbs that help with that." It was the first kindness Ruth had shown in weeks, the first crack in the wall of judgment. By morning, Martin Cross had examined the remains. He found the kerosene can, saw the burn pattern. Multiple ignition points. Arson. Jacob. This was deliberate. They both knew who. Clayton had been in town, had the motive, had made threats, but no proof, just suspicion. Jacob looked at the ruins of his workshop. He failed. "I'd rather have them and nothing else than everything without them." Sunday morning came cold and clear. Jacob stood before the mirror in his one good suit. It smelled of smoke despite Abigail's best efforts to clean it. There hadn't been time to do better. The church was packed when they arrived. Curiosity mostly, some genuine support, many still disapproving but unwilling to miss the spectacle. Pastor Reynolds performed the ceremony with quiet dignity. The words were simple, traditional, but when Jacob spoke his vows, he meant every word. "I take you, Abigail, to be my wife, to honor and cherish, to protect and provide for, as long as we both shall live." Abigail's voice was steady. "I take you, Jacob, to be my husband, to honor and cherish, to stand beside through all that comes, as long as we both shall live." The ring was his mother's, a simple gold band he had kept in a box since her death. It fit Abigail's finger perfectly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was brief, tender, a promise of more to come. Some in the congregation applauded, most sat silent, but it was done, legal, official, unbreakable. That evening alone, for the first time as husband and wife, Jacob took Abigail's face in his hands. "Are you sure you don't regret this, marrying me to escape Clayton?" "I didn't marry you to escape Clayton." She met his eyes directly. "I married you because somewhere between Christmas Eve and today, you became the reason I wake up wanting to live instead of just survive." He kissed her then, really kissed her. 3 years of loneliness on both sides meeting in that moment. She responded with equal hunger, equal need. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she smiled. "The children are asleep." "They are. Then we should be quiet." They were. Monday morning brought the custody hearing. Judge Morrison, the traveling circuit judge, had arrived in Silver Creek on schedule. Clayton had wasted no time filing his petition. The town hall served as courtroom. 70 people packed in to witness what promised to be the most dramatic legal proceeding Silver Creek had seen in years. Clayton sat with his lawyer, a man named Hendricks from Silverton. They looked confident, prepared. Jacob and Abigail sat alone. No lawyer, couldn't afford one. But Martha Hayes, the wealthy widow who'd shown quiet support, sat behind them. She leaned forward. "I know territorial law. I can advise if needed." It was something. Judge Morrison called the court to order. He was maybe 60, stern-faced, but with eyes that suggested fairness. Clayton's lawyer spoke first, painted a picture of concerned family. Blood uncle worried about children living in morally questionable circumstances. A widow who'd moved in with a strange man mere months after her husband's death. Improper behavior, suggesting unfitness as a guardian. The words landed like blows. Then it was time for testimony. Clayton took the stand, his performance polished. Concerned brother-in-law, loved his brother, promised to watch over the family. When he heard about Abigail's situation, felt duty-bound to act. "The children deserve stability, Your Honor, a proper home, not to be caught up in a widow's search for security." Hendricks drove the point home. "Mr. Porter owns property in Wyoming, has steady income, can provide immediate stability that Mrs. Thornton cannot." Jacob felt Abigail tense beside him. The use of her new name was deliberate, suggesting the marriage was a sham, a convenience. Then Martha leaned forward and whispered, "Ask about Daniel's death." Abigail took the stand, Told the truth, all of it. How Clayton had visited Daniel regularly, brought medicine, how Daniel got sicker, not better, how she'd given him the tonic every day trusting it would help. I believe Clayton poisoned my husband, Your Honor, to claim the land. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for silence. Clayton's lawyer objected. This is slander, unfounded accusation without evidence. I have evidence. Martin Cross stood. He walked to the front holding papers. Your Honor, I'm a blacksmith here in Silver Creek, but I worked as a Pinkerton detective for 10 years before that. When Clayton Porter arrived making accusations, something bothered me. He held up a telegram. This is from Dr. William Hammond in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He treated Daniel Porter before his death. Martin read the telegram aloud. Dr. Hammond's professional opinion. Daniel's symptoms consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning, not cholera. The medicine Clayton brought. 3 months of gradual poisoning. The doctor had reported his findings to the U.S. Marshal's office. An investigation was open. Clayton jumped up. This is ridiculous. I loved my brother. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. Sit down, Mr. Porter. He turned to Martha's suggestion, called Thomas to the stand. The boy was tiny in the witness chair, frightened. But when asked about his father's last days, he answered clearly. Uncle Clayton brought medicine in a brown bottle, said it would make Papa better. And did it make him better? Thomas's voice broke. No, sir. Papa got sicker. He couldn't walk anymore. His hands shook. He couldn't hold me. Simple truth from a 5-year-old, devastating in its innocence. Judge Morrison looked at Clayton with disgust. I'm denying your petition for custody. These children will remain with Mrs. Thornton. He turned to the bailiff. Send notice to the U.S. Marshal's office. Mr. Porter is to remain available for questioning regarding the death of Daniel Porter. Clayton stormed out, his lawyer following. At the door, he turned back, face twisted with rage. This isn't over. But Jacob stepped between him and Abigail. Yes, it is. Leave, now. Clayton left. They would learn later he fled to California. The Marshal's investigation would eventually catch up to him, but that was years away. For now, they were safe. Outside the courthouse, Warren Mitchell approached. Jacob, I owe you an apology, a real one. You already said that. Not publicly, not where it matters. Warren looked at the crowd gathered. I was wrong about everything. I let my grief over Rebecca turn into something ugly. I judged you for moving forward when I couldn't. He offered his hand. Rebecca would be proud of you, of what you've built. Jacob shook his hand, felt something old and broken begin to heal. Ruth Caldwell approached Abigail, nervous and uncertain. Mrs. Thornton, I wanted to apologize. I was harsh, cruel even. We all do what we think is right. I was wrong. My daughter Lydia, she's coming home next week, with her husband and baby. I've been so afraid of being judged again, I became the judge. You taught me better. That evening at home, the children finally asleep, Jacob and Abigail sat at the kitchen table. The lamp burned low between them. Abigail's voice was quiet. I gave Daniel that poison. Every day for 3 months. You didn't know. Should I have known? Should I have suspected? Jacob took her hands. Clayton was his brother. You trusted him. That's not sin. That's normal. He killed Daniel, not you. She cried then, really cried. 3 years of hell grief finally released. Jacob held her through it all. Later, as they prepared for bed, she touched the carved cradle he'd finished. Do you really want more children? With you, yes. Even after everything. Especially after everything. Outside, the last snow melted. Spring was finally breaking through. And with it, the promise of new beginnings. March arrived with mud and promise. The snow retreated slowly, revealing brown earth that would green with time. Jacob stood in the skeleton of his new workshop, hammer in hand, watching the town rebuild what fire had taken. Martin Cross worked beside him, fitting boards with the precision of someone who understood that measurement mattered. Peter Jorgensen had brought nails from his shop, refusing payment. Warren Mitchell had donated lumber from his store inventory, insisting it was the least he could do. Even men who'd shunned Jacob weeks before now showed up with tools and willing hands. They didn't apologize with words. Frontier men rarely did. But they apologized with sweat and labor, and that was worth more than empty speeches. The new workshop rose smaller than the old one, but solid. Built with community hands, it would stand longer than anything Jacob could have constructed alone. By the second week of March, the basic frame was complete. A roof overhead, walls to keep out wind, space enough for tools and lumber, and the slow rebuilding of a livelihood that had seemed lost forever. Jacob's first new commission came from an unexpected source. Ruth Caldwell appeared at his door one morning, face set with determination that barely masked nervousness. "I need a crib," she said without preamble. "My daughter Lydia, she's coming home. With my granddaughter. They'll need proper furniture." Jacob understood what the request meant. Public declaration of support. Ruth Caldwell ordering furniture from him told the whole town that Jacob Thornton was back in business, that his work was still valued, that whatever scandal had surrounded him was forgiven or at least set aside. "I'd be honored to build it." Ruth's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. And Jacob, I want you and your family there when Lydia arrives." April 12th, the afternoon stage. It would mean everything to her to see that this town can change. Inside the cabin, life had found its rhythm. Emma taught Thomas his letters using the wooden blocks Jacob had carved years ago. The boy learned quickly, hungry for knowledge, the way he'd been hungry for food that first night. Rose followed Emma everywhere, mimicking her older sister's every move. Abigail moved through the house with quiet efficiency, but Jacob noticed things. The way she tired more easily. How she'd rush outside some mornings returning pale and shaky. The fullness in her face that hadn't been there a month ago. Martha Hayes noticed too. She visited one afternoon in late March, ostensibly to check on the children's recovery from the fire. But when Abigail excused herself, suddenly rushing for the door, Martha's knowing smile said everything. "How far along?" Abigail returned, wiping her mouth, face flushed. "What? I've birthed 6 children and helped with 100 more. I know the signs." Abigail sank into a chair. "Nearly 3 months. The baby was conceived shortly after we married in late February. I wasn't certain at first. Thought it was just stress from everything." "Does Jacob know?" "Not yet, I'm afraid." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Afraid of what that man would walk through fire for you. Literally did walk through fire for your children. I'm afraid he'll think I trapped him, that I knew before the wedding and married him under false pretenses. Did you know no, I suspected, but I wasn't certain, and I didn't want him to marry me out of obligation." Martha took Abigail's hand. "That man didn't marry you out of obligation. He married you because he loves you. This baby will be a gift, not a burden. The town will count months. They'll talk. Let them talk. After everything you've been through, you think gossip can hurt you now." That evening, after the children were asleep, Abigail found Jacob in his new workshop. He was carving details into Ruth's crib, roses and vines that matched the pattern he'd used on every piece of furniture he'd built for Rebecca. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." He set down his tools, reading the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think it is." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Jacob froze. The words hung in the air between them. "You're sure?" Martha confirmed it today, 2 or 3 months along. Silence stretched. Abigail's heart hammered. This was the moment. He could be angry, could feel trapped, could regret everything. Then Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "This is the most wonderful news." His voice broke on the words. "You're not angry." "Angry." He pulled back to look at her. "Abigail, after Rebecca and the baby died, I thought I'd never have another child. Thought that door was closed forever." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, where no signs showed yet, but where life was growing. "You've given me everything. My life back, my daughter's happiness, a family, and now this. People will talk. They'll count months. They'll say I trapped you. Let them count. We know the truth. This child was conceived in love, in our marriage. Nothing else matters." Relief washed through her. She'd been carrying this fear for weeks, and he'd dissolved it with simple acceptance. "What if it's a bomb?" she asked. "Then we'll have a son. You wanted to name him Samuel, after your father." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca wanted that, but this isn't Rebecca's son. This is our son, ours to name however we choose. If it's a girl," he smiled, "then maybe Rebecca, if that's all right with you, to honor the woman who brought us together even after death." Abigail nodded, tears streaming now. I'd like that. They stood together in the workshop, surrounded by wooden tools and the smell of sawdust. Outside, spring pushed harder against winter's remnants. Inside, new life quickened. April arrived with warmth and rain. The prairie greened almost overnight. Wildflowers appeared in patches of color across the hills. Jacob's garden, neglected for 3 years, came back to life under Abigail's care. She planted vegetables with Emma's help, tomatoes and beans and corn, herbs for cooking and healing. Flowers because beauty mattered even on the frontier, especially on the frontier. Thomas followed Jacob everywhere now, a small shadow learning the trade. He could identify different woods by sight and smell, could use a hand plane without cutting himself, could measure twice and cut once, the cardinal rule of carpentry. You're good at this, Jacob told him one afternoon. Got natural talent. Thomas beamed. You think so, Papa? The word had come naturally over weeks. No formal discussion, no awkward transition. One day it was Mr. Jacob, the next Papa, as if the boy's heart had simply accepted what his mind already knew. Rose called him Papa too, though she was young enough that she barely remembered any other father. To her, Jacob had always been there, the man who saved her from fire, the man who made her mother smile. Emma thrived in ways Jacob hadn't imagined possible. The quiet, careful child who tiptoed through grief for 3 years had become vibrant, loud even. She laughed at the dinner table, argued with Thomas over whose turn it was to feed the chickens, begged for stories before bed. One evening she approached Jacob with serious eyes. Papa, can I ask you something? Always. When the baby comes, will you still love me the same? The question hit him like a blow. How many times had she worried about this, held it inside because asking felt selfish? He knelt to her level, taking her small hands in his large ones. Emma, listen to me. You are my daughter, my first child. Nothing will ever change that. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. You understand? She nodded slowly. Having more children doesn't mean less love for you. It means more love for everyone. The heart grows to fit what it needs to hold. Like Mama's house, he remembered Rebecca's words from the diary. Love multiplies. Yes, sweetheart, exactly like that. She hugged him, then fierce and tight. I'm glad we have a big family now. Me too. On April 10th, a letter arrived for Ruth Caldwell. The whole town knew when Ruth received important mail because she couldn't hide emotion if her life depended on it. She stood outside the post office, reading, tears streaming down her weathered face. By evening, everyone knew. Lydia was coming home. 2 years gone, married to a man Ruth hadn't approved of, mother to a baby Ruth had never met. Coming home despite not knowing if she'd be welcome. Ruth appeared at Jacob and Abigail's door that evening, letter clutched in shaking hands. Will you read this? Tell me what you think. Abigail took the letter, read it aloud while Ruth sat at their kitchen table crying quietly. The words were simple. Lydia loved her husband Samuel. They had a daughter named Rebecca, after Mrs. Thornton who had died. They were coming home because family mattered, because Lydia missed her mother, because she hoped that love could bridge the gap that pride had created. What should I do? Ruth asked. Welcome her, Abigail said simply. Welcome her with open arms and no conditions. That's what you should do. What if people judge me, say I'm condoning her running off? Jacob leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Ruth, what do you care more about? What people think or having your daughter back? The question hung in the air. My daughter, Ruth whispered. I want my daughter back. Then the choice is simple. Ruth left with the letter pressed to her chest like a treasure. 2 days later, she visited again. I want to apologize, publicly, for how I treated you both. That's not necessary, Abigail said. It is. What I did was cruel. I let my fear of judgment turn me into the judge. I hurt you when you needed help. I need to make that right. Easter Sunday fell on April 13th. The church was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread that something significant was going to happen, though no one quite knew what. Lydia had arrived the day before. The whole town had watched the reunion at the stage stop. Ruth Caldwell stern and proper. Ruth Caldwell running to embrace her daughter, weeping openly, holding her granddaughter for the first time, welcoming the son-in-law she'd never met with open arms. It was the kind of scene that changed how people thought about forgiveness. Now Lydia sat in church with her husband and baby, Ruth beside her holding her hand like she might disappear if she let go. Jacob and Abigail sat in their usual front pew, Emma between them, Thomas and Rose on either side, a family unit that no one questioned anymore. Pastor Reynolds took the pulpit. His sermon focused on resurrection. Not just Christ, but the kind that happened every day when people chose grace over judgment, love over law, compassion over comfortable righteousness. Easter is about more than one man rising from the dead, he said. It's about all of us rising from whatever tombs we've built for ourselves, tombs of pride, of judgment, of fear. He looked directly at his congregation. This community has been divided. We've judged when we should have welcomed. We've condemned when we should have celebrated. Today let's resurrect something else, our capacity for grace. Then something unexpected happened. Martha Hayes stood. I want to say something. Pastor Reynolds nodded, stepping aside. Martha's voice carried through the small church. For weeks I watched this town torture two good people for the crime of kindness. Jacob Thornton opened his door on Christmas Eve to a woman and children who had nowhere else. That's not scandal. That's Christianity in action. She looked around the room. If we can't see that we've lost our way. Martin Cross stood next. Jacob saved those children from a burning building. Sacrificed everything he owned. That's not a man using a woman for convenience. That's a father. A real father. Warren Mitchell rose, his voice shaking. I've already apologized privately, but it needs to be public. I let my grief over Rebecca twist into something ugly. I judged Jacob for moving forward when I couldn't. He looked at Jacob directly. Rebecca would want you to be happy. I know that now. I'm sorry for everything. Then Ruth Caldwell stood. She walked to the front of the church facing the congregation with tears streaming. My daughter came home yesterday. She ran away 2 years ago with a man I didn't approve of. I was so angry, so self-righteous. Her voice broke. I would have driven her away forever if I hadn't watched Jacob and Abigail fight for their family despite everything we threw at them. They taught me that love matters more than appearances, that forgiveness matters more than pride. She turned to Jacob and Abigail. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like. Jacob stood, then helping Abigail to her feet beside him. I have something to say. The church went silent. 6 months ago, I was dead. Walking, breathing, but dead inside. Rebecca's death broke me, and I let it. I chose to stay broken because feeling nothing was easier than feeling grief. His voice steadied. Then Abigail and her children knocked on my door on Christmas Eve. I could have sent them away. Part of me wanted to, but Rebecca's last words were open the door. So I did. He looked at Abigail, at the children, gathered close. And they saved me. All of them. This woman gave me my life back. Gave my daughter a mother. Gave me a reason to build instead of just survive. He paused, then made his announcement. In August, God willing, she'll give me another child. A child I thought I'd never have. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Some disapproving murmurs as people counted months. But Jacob spoke over them. I know what some of you are thinking. Let me be clear. This child was conceived in love, in marriage, in the family we've built. If you want to count months, go ahead. You'll find we've done nothing wrong. His voice strengthened. But even if this baby came before the wedding, I'd still stand here proud. Because love doesn't wait for perfect timing. Love shows up when it's needed. Abigail stood beside him, chin high. Thank you all, for those who stood by us, for those who've come around, even for those who haven't yet. We don't need your approval, but we welcome your friendship. For a moment, nothing happened. The church held its breath. Then Reverend Henry Caldwell began to applaud, slowly at first, then building. This is resurrection. Martha Hayes joined him, then Martin Cross, then Warren Mitchell. Ruth Caldwell stood applauding through her tears. Lydia and her husband rose. One by one, most of the congregation stood. Not everyone. 5 or 6 people walked out, faces hard with disapproval that nothing could soften. But the majority stayed. The majority chose grace. The applause built until it filled the small church like thunder. Emma rushed to hug her parents. Thomas and Rose joined. A family united while a community watched and learned what forgiveness looked like in practice. Outside afterward, people approached with handshakes and words of support. Not everyone. Some still kept their distance, but enough to matter. Enough to rebuild what had been broken. 3 months passed in a blur of growth and preparation. June arrived with heat and the promise of harvest. Jacob's workshop hummed with activity. Orders came from 3 counties now. Word had spread about the carpenter who'd rather lose everything than abandon family. People trusted that kind of integrity. The homestead thrived. Abigail's garden produced abundantly. Tomatoes and beans and corn, more than they could eat. She preserved what they didn't consume, filling jars that lined the pantry shelves. Emma turned 8 in early June. They celebrated with cake and neighbors who'd become friends again. Martha Hayes brought gifts. Martin Cross and his wife joined for dinner. Even Warren Mitchell stopped by with a carved toy for Emma, his woodworking skills rusty, but the gesture meaningful. Thomas showed everyone his latest carpentry project, a small box he'd built himself under Jacob's supervision. The joints were rough but functional. He'd carved his initials into the lid with fierce pride. "This is real craftsmanship," Jacob told him. "You should be proud." "I am Papa. Can I make another?" "As many as you want, son." Rose had appointed herself Abigail's helper in everything. She followed her mother through the garden, carrying the basket for vegetables, helped with cooking, standing on a stool to reach the counter, talked constantly about the baby coming, asking questions about whether it would be a boy or girl, if it would like her, if she could help take care of it. Abigail's pregnancy showed clearly now. Her dresses let out as far as they could go, her face glowing with health despite the discomfort of carrying a child in summer heat. In late July, a letter arrived from the U.S. Marshal's office in Cheyenne. Clayton Porter had been apprehended in San Francisco, caught attempting to sell fraudulent land deeds to unsuspecting settlers. He would stand trial for Daniel's murder. The wheels of justice turned slowly on the frontier, but they turned nonetheless. Jacob read the letter aloud to Abigail that evening. She listened in silence, one hand on her swollen belly, where their daughter grew. "It's over," she said quietly. "Yes, it's over." And they burned the letter in the fireplace and spoke of it no more. Some chapters deserved to be closed completely. Jacob watched her move through their home with wonder. After Rebecca's difficult pregnancy, the fear that had ended in tragedy, he'd thought he could never go through this again. But Abigail was strong, healthy. Martha Hayes checked on her regularly and pronounced everything perfect. One evening in late June, Jacob worked in his shop on a special project. The cradle he'd started months ago was finally complete. Every detail perfect. Roses and vines carved with precision. Oak leaves for strength. The wood sanded smooth as glass. He'd added something new. On the inside of the headboard, where only the baby would see it, he'd carved 2 names intertwined, Rebecca and Samuel, past and future woven together. The child who never lived and the child who would. Abigail found him there running her hands over the carvings. "It's the most beautiful thing you've ever made." "Had to be, for our daughter." "You think it's a girl?" "Martha thinks so. Says you're carrying high," whatever that means. Abigail laughed. "Old wives' tales, could be wrong. Either way, we'll be happy." She settled into the chair he'd built for her, one hand on her swollen belly. "Have you thought about names if it's a boy? What about Daniel, for your first husband, the father of your children?" Abigail's eyes filled. "You'd do that. He gave me Thomas and Rose. That's a debt worth honoring. And if it's a garçon or Rebecca, like we discussed, unless you've changed your mind." "No, Rebecca is perfect." They sat together in the workshop as evening light faded to purple. Outside, children's laughter drifted through the open door. Emma teaching Thomas and Rose some new game, their voices bright with uncomplicated joy. "We made it," Abigail said quietly. "Through everything, we made it. We did. I love you, Jacob Thornton." It was the first time she'd said it plainly, without hedging or qualification. Just simple truth. "I love you too." The baby kicked hard enough that Jacob felt it through her dress. New life asserting itself, demanding to be acknowledged. "Not long now," Abigail said. "No, not long." August 15th, 1879. Dawn broke hot and still, the kind of morning where the air itself felt heavy with waiting. Jacob woke to Abigail's hand on his shoulder. It's time. He was up immediately, pulling on clothes, his heart hammering. Martha Hayes lived 2 miles away. Emma could ride for her. Emma. He burst into her room. Ride to Mrs. Hayes. Tell her the baby's coming. Emma was dressed and out the door in minutes, her horse galloping toward Martha's homestead. Jacob returned to find Abigail breathing through a contraction, her face serene despite obvious pain. I've done this before, she reminded him. I know what to expect. But Jacob remembered Rebecca. Remembered how quickly things could go wrong, how easily life could slip away despite best efforts and prayers. Martha arrived within the hour, her bag of supplies in hand. She took one look at Abigail and smiled. Good, strong contractions. This baby knows what it's doing. She turned to Jacob. You, out. Take the children. This is women's work. Jacob hesitated. I'll call if you are needed. Now go. He gathered Thomas and Rose, leaving Emma to help Martha. They spent the morning in the workshop, but Jacob couldn't focus. Every sound from the house made him jump. Every cry brought his heart into his throat. Thomas noticed his fear. Papa, is Mama going to be all right? Jacob knelt to the boy's level. Yes, your mother is strong. She'll be fine. He said it with more confidence than he felt. Hours passed. Morning became afternoon. The heat intensified. Jacob paced while Thomas and Rose played quietly, sensing the tension. Then just before 3 in the afternoon, a baby's cry split the air. Strong, angry, demanding attention. Jacob ran for the house. Martha met him at the door, smiling. You have a daughter, healthy, perfect, and your wife is fine. Relief nearly buckled his knees. Can I see them? Of course. Abigail lay in bed, exhausted but radiant. In her arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. The baby's face was red and wrinkled eyes squinting against the light. Meet Rebecca, Abigail said softly. Jacob sat on the edge of the bed looking at his daughter, his second daughter, the child he'd thought he'd never have. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. Too soon to tell. A mother knows. Martha ushered in the other children. Emma approached reverently, looking at her new sister with awe. Thomas and Rose were less restrained, full of questions and excitement. Can I hold her? Is she always going to be this small? Why is she so red? Laughter filled the room. The sound of family. Complete and whole and real. That evening, after Martha had gone home and the children were asleep, Jacob sat beside Abigail's bed holding little Rebecca. The baby slept in his arms, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Thank you, he said. For what? For knocking on my door that Christmas Eve. For staying when everyone said you should go. For giving me back my life. You gave me mine first. Maybe we gave them to each other. Outside, the sun set in colors of orange and gold. The prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. Jacob thought about the journey that had brought them here. The knock on Christmas Eve that had changed everything. The grief that had tried to bury him. The love that had brought him back to life. The door he'd opened on Christmas Eve had let in more than 3 cold strangers. It had let in hope, future, family. Some people think love is finite, that loving again means loving less. But Jacob had learned differently. The heart expands to hold what it must. Rebecca's love hadn't died with her. It had transformed, become the foundation for something new. The cradle sat ready in the corner, hand-carved roses and vines, oak leaves for strength, names intertwined where only the baby would see. Tomorrow he would place his daughter in that cradle, watch her sleep in wood he'd shaped with his own hands. But tonight he held her close, this miracle child, this gift. Abigail slept peacefully, her face relaxed in exhaustion. Emma breathed quietly in the next room, Thomas and Rose beside her. 5 children now where there had been 1. 2 adults where there had been 1 ghost walking through empty rooms. A family built from strangers and grief and courage. Built from opening a door when every instinct said to keep it closed. Built from choosing love over safety, compassion over comfort. Snow had buried Montana that Christmas Eve 6 months ago. But spring had come despite winter's fury, and now summer warmth filled every corner of what had once been a tomb. Jacob looked at his sleeping daughter, at his sleeping wife, at the home they'd built together from nothing but need and hope and stubborn determination. The door he'd opened on Christmas Eve had changed everything. He would never close it again. Rebecca had known this truth long before him. The love he'd shared with her hadn't died. It had grown, expanded, included more people in its embrace. She would approve. He knew that with certainty. Outside stars began to appear, sharp and bright against darkening sky. The prairie settled into night sounds, crickets and wind, and the distant call of an owl hunting. Inside, a family slept, safe, whole, complete. Jacob finally placed baby Rebecca in her cradle. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. He watched her for a long moment, this tiny person who represented hope in future and the continuation of love beyond death. Then he climbed into bed beside Abigail. She stirred, reaching for his hand in her sleep. He held it, feeling her pulse strong and steady. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, crops to tend, furniture to build, children to raise, a community to live with and work alongside. But tonight there was only this, a full house, breathing in warmth and life in every room. The sound of family filling spaces that grief had emptied. The snow had melted months ago, spring had come and settled into summer, and Jacob Thornton, who'd thought his heart died 3 winters past, had discovered it had only been waiting. Waiting for a knock on Christmas Eve, waiting for strangers to become home, waiting for love to teach him the difference between surviving and living. He turned off the lamp and closed his eyes. His family was waiting, his life was waiting, the future was waiting, and this time he was ready. The door stood open. Tomorrow the lamp would burn again in the window, a beacon for anyone who needed shelter. Jacob had learned what Rebecca knew all along: love never ends. It only transforms, expanding to hold whatever the heart needs most. Outside, the prairie rested under stars. Inside, a family slept. The door that opened on Christmas Eve had changed everything. It would never close again.